Sue, past issues of the Fee Simple, we have published interviews with members of the section inquiring about how they came to real estate practice, real estate law. So, what led you to real property law in particular?
Well, mine is kind of that long story because I would not say that I found real estate law. Real estate law definitely found me. My original plan was to eventually become a prosecutor. And I thought the way to get there was that once I had my undergraduate degree, I would become a police officer and I would go to law school at night. I did not realize that was not a good plan and that it was one that probably wouldn't work. And so instead, I still went to law school at night and I worked full time. But the first job that I was offered once I was out of undergrad was with a title company that was also a very small law firm in Wheaton, Maryland. So I went to work there. I knew nothing about real estate except what I had learned, was what I was learning in law school. But I can remember being very confused by even what a deed was and what a mortgage was. But I had some patient teachers at that firm, and they taught me real estate. And from there, I was then at that point in law school at night, and I left that small firm and I went to a national title company for a period of time in Washington, D.C. And then from there, I kind of found what I thought was, well, what was my dream job at the time, and that was working for a law firm in Alexandria, Old Town Alexandria, and going to law school at night. And I was able to kind of parlay all that I had learned from real estate into being a paralegal at the law firm and supervising their residential real estate department. So that's kind of a long story on how real estate found me. And then probably how did I stay in real estate? Because, once I graduated from law school, I practiced with that same law firm for a year. And then we relocated to Williamsburg so that my husband could go to law school here at William and Mary. Another long, this one I will truly make the long story short. I opened up my own practice with 1 year under my belt, and I had a general law practice. I still kept the real estate component in my practice as well as representing community associations, but that was a little tougher field to break into here in Williamsburg with not knowing anybody here, not having a client list that was portable from Alexandria. And so that took me a little longer period of time, but I just kept coming back to real estate. I enjoyed the challenges of real estate. I enjoyed all the different components of real estate. And I also found out that I probably had a pretty good knack for it in trying to, in analyzing the issues that you have for a real estate practice and trying to reach a solution for everyone.
The law firm in Alexandria wasn't Davis and Ruffner, was it?
It was not. It was, it's what, when I went there, it was Fagelson, Schoenberger, Payne and Arthur. And while I was there, it became Fagelson, Schoenberger, Payne and Dykemeister. And the national title company was Ticor Title in Washington, D.C. And then Stanley Goldstein was the lawyer in Wheaton, Maryland.
Well, sometime off the record, you and I will have to discuss our various experiences in Northern Virginia, because as you may know, that's where I started as well. So, what have you found to be the most rewarding part of your practice?
Mm.
And at the same time, what's been the most frustrating?
Okay. I would say the most rewarding is that you really get to be there in some very big moments for your clients. So when you have the new homeowner coming to you and saying, can you do my closing and walk me through this process? I still do that. I've been doing that for 36 years, and it's always fascinating because you have somebody who's very excited about that next step in their life, and you get to be the one that helps them get there. I would also say it's, helping somebody find commercial space when they're starting a new business. and all the excitement that is there. So just kind of getting to be there in those big moments that people have in their lives in terms of a transaction that you are skilled to handle and that you enjoy doing. And um, for the other component of my practice, the community association law, it's really resolving an issue for a community that we represent. And some of those issues can be very large issues. We've dealt with some pretty complex issues for communities when they find out that maybe they don't have the infrastructure that they thought they had. We've had ones where we've had maybe a casualty that occurs in the community and we have to address it. And it is very rewarding when you're able to help those clients and reach the solution that is the best solution for them. I would say on frustrating things, I think in some ways a lot of days we feel like our days are very frustrating. But when somebody asks me a question like this, I find that so much of what I've done, there have been days there are more good days than bad days. But the bad days are a lot of times would come from those few transactions where you don't have everybody rowing in the same direction and you're really having difficulty getting everyone to kind of get on board to, well, this is where we all want to get. There's many paths we can take, but can we at least agree on what the goal is? And I know, Steve, you probably had some of those, and Hayden, you too, on where you just can't get all the parties focused on what that goal is. And then you're just going down a lot of different paths that aren't very efficient. And I'd say inefficiency is probably something I find frustrating in really about anything I do in life. If there's inefficiency in it, it really can start to drag you down, and it makes the day not as fun, and it makes the transaction not as fun. The other ones that I find very frustrating are those delays that are beyond our control, where you've put everything in place, you're ready to go, and then there's an intervening or hiccup, and you find out, well, there's nothing you can do about it, and yet your client has really relied on the process that's been laid out, that everybody's on the same schedule, and you've got to be the one who bears that bad news to them and says, it's going to be another couple weeks. And so I think those are the frustrating areas that for me are my practice.
I think there's a certain amount of inefficiency that's built into real estate law,
True.
because there's so many parties that tend to be involved. I mean, if you're a litigator, you have like one client at a time, and that client is, that case for you. There may be witnesses or whatever that you need to bring in, but essentially you have one party. And I agree. I mean, with real estate law, you have to bring everybody together, and some of them are somewhat truculent, to be honest. And a lot of times, I've kind of felt like I needed a striped shirt and a whistle, and I suspect you have too.
True. And I find when we've, trained paralegals, it's really telling them, there are things that are going to be beyond your control. And, we're really looking at that collaboration and trying to be the person in the room, like you said, the referee or even the coach, and maybe even the assistant coach, because they're typically nicer, where you're just trying to get everybody together and to say, this is what we're trying to accomplish. And I've been lucky. I have two really great paralegals that have been with us for about 33 years, I think. And so they kind of know what our expectation is and what we try to accomplish when we're doing those kind of transactions. And really, you're advocating for your client and to a certain degree, but you're also really trying to do the transactional work, which takes another skill set.
It does indeed. Hayden, and please jump in at any time here. What advice would you give to a graduate considering real estate practice, other than run the other way?
Well, and I wouldn't tell them to run the other way. I think any part of what you decide to do as a lawyer has those frustrating moments. I would tell them, be open to the opportunities that present themselves. Obviously, I did not come at my career from the standpoint of this is what I want to do. I thought I wanted to do something else. And it's real easy also for me to say, be open, to the paths that come before you or the opportunities. But I think new attorneys also have a lot of pressures on them, including student loan debt and then billing expectations. All of those, I think create a tougher environment sometimes for new attorneys now. But I would tell them be open to it. It's a great practice area. And when you're looking at it, you find out there's a lot of different things you can do with real estate. It doesn't have to be, I'm going down to do a title search. It doesn't have to be, I'm going to do residential closings only. There's a lot of opportunity. And like I said, I think some of our commercial work can be really fascinating when you're helping somebody set up a small business and when they're including you and looking at some of the lease options that are out there or the letters of intent, and you really get to be on that ground floor, helping them get established in what they want to do. So I would say be open to it. It might not be your first choice, but for me, clearly it wasn't even one of my choices, but was definitely at this point, it's my first choice. I don't have any regrets about having gone into a real estate practice.
Well, like you, I'm a graduate of George Mason. Um, do you feel like the law schools adequately address real property from a practical standpoint? I know that for me, you know, property law one just simply wasn't enough. I know Hayden Ann, for instance, had at least a society at Richmond that helped her with the concept of what the real practice of law, real property law would be. But I'm wondering if you think that the law schools could do a better job of introducing prospective lawyers to practice like yours.
Um, I would say from my perspective, what I received at George Mason, I think was a really good property course. I learned a lot in that course that at least as I was working in that area and taking the class at the same time, it really did help things gel a lot. But from that standpoint, I was probably a little spoiled too in being able to work in that field at the very same time that I'm taking that class. So you're not looking at things in theory, you're actually getting to apply them as you're being taught those items. And I think that does make a difference. I'm not sure the law schools are really set up to provide that. Especially, as a first year, you're really trying to cram in so much information into a student's head, to permit them to have that broader exposure to what the law is. I know now I taught at William and Mary just for a couple semesters, early 2000s, and it was a advanced real estate course. And it was surprising to me that some of the law schools no longer are really doing even the basic property law. And the law students, we really had to go back and do a little bit more with some of those building blocks that I think you did get in property class. And it also told me how important those building blocks are. And I kind of had the reverse then experience where now I'm teaching it, but I'm also practicing in that area. And I'm so used to saying, well, that's how we do it, that you can't explain that to a law student that way. So instead, I too had that nice review of what the building blocks are, like what's a deed, why do you get a survey, what's a meets and bounds description, kind of all those real basics that people need. So I think there probably could be a lot more that law schools do if somebody decided they wanted to be on a real property track. That would be really, really helpful as you went into a practice. But, I would also tell law students, if that's really where you're going, you might want to seek out those types of opportunities while you're in school. It's tough, but maybe you get to meet with a practitioner, once a month and you can learn a few things from that practitioner. Or, even when you're looking at your summer internships. And I'd love to hear, Hayden, I don't know what the society, so how did that work?
We had a real estate law society at University of Richmond, and that was a group of students who were interested in real estate law, and we would host panels and networking events with real estate lawyers, and it was a great opportunity to learn about different areas of real estate law. And we also had a couple extra courses in addition to our first year property law course that focused on real estate. We had real estate transfers and finance, and then housing law. And there were also a lot of opportunities to be research assistants for real estate law. So we definitely had a lot of good opportunities at University of Richmond.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
What aspects? Oh, sorry, you go ahead, Steve.
Go ahead. No, that's all right.
Sue, I was going to ask you, what aspects of your practice do you think will be most helpful to you in your new role as president of the bar?
I think there's a few that come from having a real estate practice and maybe having, any type of law practice. I don't know. But real estate, you really have to be very collaborative in what you do, and you have to work well with others, I think. And I think, those are two components that I think help you with leadership, being able to connect with people, being able to hear what they have to say. Because I think in real estate, we do have to do a lot of listening. And if you're not hearing what your client is really asking for, or you're sort of cutting to the chase and you kind of skip over the whole history they gave you of how the family is not cooperative with each other, and then you get down to where you go, well, all we need is to get them to sign a deed, and client looks at you and says, you didn't hear what I said, they're not going to sign anything. So I think that listening skill is really, really important. And then, like I said, the connections. The other parts I see are that, with real property law, it's a daily exercise to make sure you're up to date on case law, statutes that are changing, and it can be, not just Virginia statutes, but federal statutes that deal with, real property issues. As we all just went through the reporting stuff that said, yes, you're going to have to report by this date, and then we have case law that says, well, now we're going to put it on hold. Staying up to date with those things, and then also staying up to date with like the really local stuff you have with your clerk's office. So I think it's that recognition of you have all these umbrellas that are over you that control what you do. And as a bar leader, you have the same kind of things. There are things that you may want to do, but they're not necessarily the mission of the Virginia State Bar. And so you've got to look at that umbrella. Then you've also got to look at the umbrella of, we're a state agency, and what are some of the parameters that you have there. So I think kind of all those things for real estate, I do find that they've given me some skills that I think will be helpful to the bar presidency.
What are your priorities as president?
The priorities is such a tough thing. There's a lot of questions like where people are asking you, what is your theme going to be? And what are you going to talk about? And there's a strong suggestion when you go to Bar Leadership Institute classes that, the ones through the ABA or elsewhere, that you should have some kind of theme so that you really don't lose your focus when you're out there speaking, and that people are able to come away with maybe some words of wisdom that you might have, or some suggestions or ideas. And I would say that probably the top priorities that I see for my presidency are, we're in the middle of a strategic plan. And so I think as president, I think you should stick with that strategic plan to make sure that it's executed. Obviously, as president, you're not necessarily the one executing it, but it's something that you can keep at the forefront in terms of what members are seeing and what you're trying to accomplish. And so that would be one. I think the other is that, I think it's always important when we travel as bar leaders, Virginia is held in very high regard, and our Virginia State Bar is held in high regard. We're an example on so many things that we do. And so I think it's wanting to also make sure that, one, our lawyers know that, and that we continue to uphold kind of the highest levels of professionalism and ethics, because it is something that other states know about us. And you don't really realize that until you go to some of these bar leadership classes that we have. And it's like, oh, wait, what does Virginia think? And so it's kind of neat to see that respect that we have. I would say on our strategic plan, a couple of the areas that we have that we're looking at are one, the financial stability of the bar. We got hit pretty hard with certain inflation areas on our, staff cost, on technology, on rent, those kind of things. And they really didn't keep pace with the revenue, and probably not a surprising thing since our dues have been stagnant since 2000. So when you are looking at something like that, you've got to take some action. So we're just in step one where we have proposed legislation. It's made it through the House and the Senate, and now it's waiting for the governor's signature. So that's going to permit us to, raise the bar dues. Not something you necessarily want your presidential platform to be, but it's really about financial responsibility and accountability. So that's a big part. Member engagement is another one that's on our strategic plan. And with member engagement, it's really just trying to strengthen the relationships with our lawyers in the Virginia State Bar. The other component to that is also making sure that we continue to foster an inclusive environment so that we're always getting different perspectives. Because, the three of us sitting here could be asked a question and come at it from three different perspectives, and they could all be great answers, right? So it's looking at that member engagement a little bit too. And then, the other big one that we have to look at is access to justice and the legal deserts. And that's a bigger issue all around for the legal profession. The Virginia State Bar is not the party that can really solve this. The Virginia State Bar took on, and we have a nice report through our EGAD report. And that report also references the stakeholders and kind of what we think are some recommendations that could really help us with those legal deserts. And so I see that we have those things as kind of the priorities that I would be looking at, trying to make sure that we keep at the top of the list for the Virginia State Bar. But I think a lot of it comes down to our professionalism, our core values in terms of being lawyers.
I would say that inclusivity has taken a bit of a hit with the work from home aspect of this. And, the legal profession, I think, is one where unless you're doing things like, Hayden, Ann, and I are doing, it's very difficult to sustain a practice working from home. But, office space is so expensive, storage space is so expensive. I agree with you. I think these are issues that are going to have to be addressed in the future, and I don't know necessarily that it's the bar's function to do that, but it's certainly one of the challenges that I think is facing attorneys as they come out of law school. And like you say, that there's a lot of debt involved, and that may shape the direction of any particular graduate's career. So there are definitely challenges. From that standpoint, though, what concerns are you hearing from attorneys who are in practice?
I think the concerns that I've heard of late are, a lot of concerns about the rule of law. We're hearing a lot of that, judicial independence. And, you can look at those issues, and some of those aren't issues, again, that the Virginia State Bar can fix. But I think when we look at, part of our mission is protection of the public. And to me, I would see that as also maintaining the public's confidence in what we do. And, we've always, lawyers have, we've at times had, more lawyer jokes out there about what we do. But I also look at it right now as a time when, it's time for us to celebrate being a lawyer and shine as lawyers, because when we do it well, it's the whole reason that we have a legal system that really works and something that we can be proud of. And so paying attention to the rule of law, our professionalism, and that judicial independence, I think, is something that I hear a lot of lawyers that are concerned about those issues right now. The other ones I hear are really AI. Can't seem to get away from AI, and then and the legal deserts. So I'd say those are kind of the top three things I keep hearing about. And you know, I also recognize with legal deserts that kind of takes us into a whole other section, and there's so many subparts to that, which is what you were addressing. You know, the financial issues facing new lawyers are big, and there's not an easy way to solve that. I've talked with some colleagues across the country, and some areas are really doing a lot more with stipends for lawyers. Talked with one, the stipend has come from like a private donor. It's not a lot though. And so, I think you have to figure out like, what do you need to try and encourage people to maybe even go to some of those areas. But even with those stipends for a legal desert, it's not necessarily getting people to go to that practice area. So if you know that that's the issue, you recognize it's not just an issue for getting somebody to go to a rural practice. It's definitely also the reason that they are looking at expectations of a lot of billable hours, which, obviously plays into lawyer wellness. And then we also have the issue of then getting that student loan debt paid back. Some of the law schools have some law school forgiveness programs for those loans. I don't know the details of those, but that's also why it's really important for us to keep this at the forefront, to make sure like our stakeholders in this are talking about it and figuring out some better solutions to the problems that we identified in that report.
You mentioned the legal deserts, and I suspect that probably the legal deserts are also where the medical deserts are. And
Probably.
yeah, you're in the eastern part of the state. I've started out in Northern Virginia, and in those areas, typically, I think lawyers tend to be specialized. But if you go to like Southwest Virginia or the Shenandoah Valley, um, if you have just one specialty, you're not going to survive. I mean, you need to have a general practice, and I think that's one of the most difficult things to try to adapt. You know, out of out of a practice where you may not have had experience with the guy who walks into your office and says, "Hey, listen, I just got into a car wreck and I'm badly hurt. I need you to represent me against this guy who crossed the center line." Um, and it's to me, I think that's the most difficult part, and I don't know how to resolve those kinds of problems because you know, typically if you're in one of these legal deserts and you have a general practice, it's just a matter of time before somebody comes in the door and has a problem that you have not addressed before and you don't feel comfortable uh, doing with this particular client, and maybe that's where mentorship comes into the problem. What are your thoughts on mentorship, particularly for those kinds of practices?
I think mentorship is extremely important. I think being a general practitioner nowadays is a lot harder than it was like when I started my own practice. And some reasons for that are technology. Your standard of practice when I started was, well, you go over to the law school and you do your research in books. It wasn't computer assisted. There was some computer assist then. I'm not that old. But you had to pay for it. It was very expensive when Westlaw and Lexis came out. And so for the general practitioner with their own practice, you were pretty much walking over to the law school to do the research. And so your standard at that point in time was a little bit different than this basically global research you can do now. You can look at every jurisdiction, and there's so much out there. And so I think it's also probably a little more overwhelming and more difficult to be a general practitioner in some ways. In other ways, I can also look at it and say you have a lot of things at your fingertips that can help you. Um, we used a lot of form books, and you probably remember those. And
I
form
do
books
too.
helped you figure out, and they usually had also some footnotes that told you where it came from. And so that could get you started on some good research. Now there's forms everywhere, but you also don't know if they're solving the problem. So I think having a general practice, I think is really difficult. I think if you can find a mentor, I think that is a great way to do it. I had a couple really good mentors in my career, and they really helped with kind of guiding me, not only by showing me how to do certain work, but I also think the other important part of that is by the example they set. And they teach you how to be a good lawyer. They teach you the importance of your integrity. They teach you the importance of relationships, not burning bridges, and why all that matters. And I think it's easy sometimes, especially when we are working remotely, to almost have a sense of being isolated and not recognizing that that lawyer that you may just have said some choice words to, uh, maybe somebody you meet again, or maybe somebody who actually has the opportunity for you. So, looking at lawyers who have more experience as mentors or potential mentors, I think is a great idea. We have a lot of areas where in these legal deserts, we have lawyers who have established practices as general practitioners, and they don't have a succession plan because no lawyers are coming there. And how you parlay that over to maybe a new lawyer or a newer lawyer to come in and say it's here, and if you work with me, yes, it can all be yours. And then the question is that what they want, and does it actually pay enough to for you to live decently, and for you to also pay back the student loan debt that you might have. So it's a real conundrum on kind of how we get there and what would really work. And I'm just not sure I know there's not one answer for solving the legal desert issue. I think you have to look at all the stakeholders who are out there, and the EGAD report, we pointed out, it's really dependent on the law schools, the Board of Bar Examiners, the courts, the legislature, Legal Services Corporation, local and specialty bars, uh, private funding, all of those things are going to be necessary to really bring this together.
You've been a member of the real property section for a long time, and there are more sections in the bar than I probably even know. What do you think the real property section has to maybe teach other sections that they may not be doing now? What can other sections learn from the real property section? And the converse of that is, what do you think the real property section can learn from other sections?
So I think the real property section is such a valuable tool for any lawyer who's going to be in real estate law. And part of that is the breadth that is covered by the real property section. I mean, it goes from, residential and commercial transactional work to title insurance, to community associations and beyond. So I think if you find yourself as a real property lawyer, getting involved in something and suddenly there's a little twist or turn, people in the section who are involved in that area. And you can pick up the phone and you can call them, or you can email them, however you want to communicate. But I think that is something that is just invaluable in terms of what the real property section offers. I also think the real property section has done just a fantastic job with the fee simple and providing those type of resources for lawyers who are in our section or who are in this practice area. And there are even ones that, there are articles that are in there that may apply to something that somebody's not in the real property section, but they're in a maybe government section or something. And they go, well, wait, that applies to what we do. It might be on eminent domain or condemnation or something. So I just think it's that how much we cover in the real property section. And it's a very big section. So, it's, I think, one of the more higher populated sections. And from that, you also then have just more opportunity to meet people. And, like I said, some of those people that you meet could become the next opportunity for your practice. And I think that other sections can look at that and say I don't know how long the fee simple's been published, but it's been a long time.
It's been a long,
Yeah,
it goes back to the mid 80s, I think.
And I think there's something to be said about that. It's something you rely on, and that it's going to come, and there's going to be information in there that somehow is very helpful to you. And I think that other sections can realize, like, it's not always about changing things up. Sometimes it also is going with something that is working, even though you've been doing it for a long time. And then maybe the little tweaks are, like you said, it's now available in a digital format versus just as a publication. And so that's kind of the difference that was made. I think other sections, there's 24 sections in the Virginia State Bar. And I had really never been to any other sections meeting except real property. And I took it upon myself to go to a few this year. And primarily the ones are conferences that were then turned into sections. Attend their meetings, find out a little bit more about how they do things. And it was really interesting. I also attended, there's a committee or a section chair meeting where you go through kind of an orientation process. And that provided me with just a lot of information about how much goes on in the Virginia State Bar that you are completely unaware of, even if you are involved in a section or you are involved in council or leadership. There's just so much that's going on that we don't even know about. And so I think learning from other sections, a lot of them are doing really kind of innovative things with each other in terms of providing educational programs, and kind of through the intersection of, the two practice areas. And I think those are great. There are still sections that are doing writing contests and trying to really get to law students or younger students in terms of showing them what lawyers do, letting them participate in that a little bit. And I think those are all things that we can learn from. And as we feel like we might be getting stagnant in an area, any section could look over at another section and say, hey, I see you guys did this. How did that work? Anything that you would say we shouldn't do if we decided to take that on. And you don't really step on somebody else's toes, because you're typically, a lot of times if it's your section, it's oftentimes that subject matter. And so I think it can be something that is useful to look at what the other sections are doing too.
Hey, Nan, do you want to jump in here?
Yes. What would you say are some of the biggest concerns that you're hearing from attorneys today that we can address as a bar section and as the bar as a whole?
I think a lot of it is the AI is a big deal. And I think the bar is addressing that issue. I think we've addressed that in a legal ethics opinion with regard to how you do your billing. There are a lot of programs on how AI works. I think it's also, the bar, we have our side of the house that is on discipline. And there are a few groups already out there that are reporting on those cases where people are using AI and they are not looking at what their cases. Oops, sorry about that. And they're looking at the cases where people have cited AI cases that don't exist, the hallucinations. And so I think from a bar standpoint, some of those cases will be coming to the bar for us to look at. Other states have had them. And I think the group that is doing the study, they've got like 800 cases that are out there where lawyers have cited something in a brief. They've cited the case to the court. The court informs them it doesn't exist, and the lawyer continues to say, well, it does. There was one recent one where the lawyer not only continued to say it existed, but what they said was they started quoting more things from a case that was hallucinated. So I think AI is an issue for, is an issue for our bar association to stay on top of, because it's something that lawyers can really step into a trap as they are making mistakes with citing those cases. So I think AI is probably, one of the big ones. We also obviously have the concern that people have right now with the rule of law and with kind of the professionalism and integrity and making sure we as lawyers are not committing any type of misrepresentation to a court. We have the independence of the judiciary. So these are all things that we see. Now, for the Virginia State Bar as a state agency, we can't do anything political, but many of those issues are not political. They're really issues that are related to what we do every day, it relates to our practice. So trying to maintain that professionalism.
I think
I think
AI probably has less impact on real property law than other aspects, though.
I think it may, and I think probably for the real property section, if you're using AI, it's very interesting because, we use the Lexis program and you're able to put your documents in there. It'll draft a memo on inconsistencies. It'll make you a chart. It'll do a lot of things. But what's really interesting is that it doesn't always do it really well. And so, it's reviewing what it's providing you. You still have to do the work. And I'm kind of at that point with like AI where it is a tool and it can be a tool to help you with some efficiencies in terms of your work. But at the same time, I don't find that it fills the role of a lawyer. And I think when you start to make the assumption it's smarter than a lawyer, it's just wrong. Because when we've looked at it and used it for a few things, I had one issue where I don't know where it even got the hallucination from. If you looked at the documents we loaded in and then its conclusion, it was like, well, where did you get that from? And, Lexis is not one of those programs like ChatGPT where you can have an argument with ChatGPT if you like and say, where'd you get it from? It'll say, brilliant, it was brilliant of you to find that error, but it will try to tell you where it got it from. Lexis doesn't tell you that. And so when you're looking at it, you realize it's an error. And so it's truly not, I know there's been some concern it's going to take our jobs. It's really not going to take our jobs. And if it ends up there, we're in a lot of trouble because it permits you to find things quickly, but it doesn't know the facts like you know the facts. And it also doesn't have the experience level that you have in terms of, well, now what do I do with the law, the facts, and coming to a conclusion. So, but I think our section can help with that. I think it's teaching younger lawyers the tool that it is versus that it is the answer, because it's not the answer. And I think that it's too often that it's wrong. I don't know the statistics that are out there, or that I think, I don't know which program has it, but one of the lower hallucination rates is like 60%. And that's a lot. So I think, we as the real estate, as the real property section can look at that and see how do we help, and in particular, lawyers who are new to using AI, getting them used to the fact that this is not the answer, it's a tool.
Right.
And I think that's what you asked me about those two, but you start to go off like AI. I'm not AI, so I start to go off on some tangents myself.
Usually, what I find when I am at the doctor's office is at the end of the visit, I will usually say, "Is there anything I should have asked you that I didn't?" So, Sue,
Let's see. I think you've asked me, kind of, things I would want to cover in terms of, my presidency coming up and my relation to the real property section. Um, I think, the other one we touched on a little bit is about remote work. And I think remote work, has been great. Another kind of rewarding part of the practice was being able to keep the lights on for your clients during the pandemic and showing them other ways to do things. And in particular, we had a lot of homeowner associations and they're still required to have meetings. And nicely, the budget bill that year permitted them to also have, online meetings and use, a digital video or whatever they were going to use to accomplish that. But being able to talk to them about, the ways to use kind of remote work, remote meetings to keep, doing the business that they needed to do was a rewarding area. And at the same time, I think remote work has also made us realize that ours truly is a people business, and we can't take that out of what we do. And so even though I do a lot of my board trainings for homeowner associations on Zoom now, I recognize I have a few who would rather come into the office and still have that face-to-face. But we've also had just as many of them get used to it being on Zoom or Microsoft Teams, where we can still connect and we're still face-to-face. And everybody, we all try to have our video on so you can see reactions, and you can still have those conversations. But I think if we go completely remote, where we're just using sort of text, email, never really having the conversation directly, I think it changes what we do a little bit. And for myself, I find it becomes a little more isolating when I'm not having those kind of conversations. And I realize that the practice of law is great, but it's also the relationship I have with people that is probably better, being able to see a colleague smile at something you say, being able to see somebody frown at what you say and you go, what did I just say that I shouldn't have said? Those are all great people skills to have, as you do, gosh, as you just even talk to your family, your friends, anything you do, just to see those reactions so that you can also kind of self-regulate and know when you need to either step in or step back.
I agree. Hey, Nan, I think are you frozen?
No, I'm here. Can you hear me?
There, your
Okay.
camera moved a little. There you go. But I really appreciate you guys giving me this opportunity. I didn't expect it. And when you asked, it was like, okay. And then it's like, this is a great opportunity to be able to have that discussion. So Steve and Hayden, Ann, thank you very much for letting me do that. I will do a couple plugs. One, a lot of people have given me condolences on my swearing in, and I'm like, no, not necessary. I'm pretty excited about it. So I'm very excited about being sworn in June, and then I take office July 1. But I hope you guys are coming to the annual meeting, and anybody who's listening to the interview, I hope you listen. Maybe it's before the annual meeting and we get you there. I think the annual meeting is a great way for us to celebrate what we do. And I think it's also that opportunity to see colleagues who you've known forever and then meet new ones. You get some education. And the other part that is really important is we get to have some fun. So hopefully you guys will be at the annual meeting and I'll get to see you there.
I'm already registered.
Oh, great.
Sue, thank you for your time. And I think, we speak for the entire section in wishing you well for your tenure as president. So
I appreciate that, because when you know that you've got 400 and some people standing with you, it's pretty awesome.
yeah. Thank you.
Yep. Thank you.